This is just a regular auto shop, and you're just a grease monkey in overalls. There's no way you designed that prototype engine. Stop wasting my time, sneered Amanda Wells, tossing Jackson Miller's detailed blueprints onto the oil-stained counter of Crossroads Auto Repair. Jackson, 52, his calloused hands instinctively adjusting the faded blue cap that had been his trademark for decades, felt a familiar weight of dismissal settle in his chest. "These designs are mine, ma'am," he replied quietly. Amanda just laughed. "Sure they are." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Just then, the weathered metal door of Crossroads Auto Repair swung open with unusual force, drawing every eye in the cramped waiting area. A striking woman in an immaculate charcoal suit, her presence commanding instant respect, stood framed. In the doorway, sunlight glinting off a NASA insignia pin on her lapel. Her sharp gaze swept the room before settling on Jackson with unmistakable recognition, then dawning indignation. Jackson Miller hadn't always been the head mechanic at Crossroads Auto Repair in the small town of Millfield. For most residents and customers, he was simply Jack, the reliable, soft-spoken man who could diagnose an engine problem by ear and fix nearly anything with wheels. His weathered face, perpetually smudged with a bit of grease despite his meticulous cleaning habits, was as familiar to locals as the town's lone traffic light. At 52, Jackson carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his craft intimately. His movements around the garage were deliberate and efficient, wasting no motion as he worked. His hands, large and powerful, bore the marks of decades of mechanical work, calloused palms, scarred knuckles and fingernails that never quite came clean, despite his careful scrubbing at the end of each day. Yet these same hands could disassemble and reassemble the most delicate components with surprising gentleness. The small auto repair shop that Jackson had owned for the past 15 years sat at the literal crossroads of Millfield, where County Road 16 met Highway 83. The building itself was unassuming, red brick with large garage doors, a small waiting area, and an office that doubled as a parts storage room. What distinguished Crossroads from other repair shops wasn't its appearance, but its reputation. People from 3 counties would drive past closer options to have Jackson look at their vehicles. What most of his customers didn't know, what most people in Millfield didn't realize, was that Jackson Miller had once been Dr. Jackson Miller, one of the most innovative mechanical engineers at NASA's propulsion laboratory. His work on efficient combustion engines and fuel systems had earned him numerous patents and industry accolades. But that had been another life, one he had deliberately stepped away from 15 years ago after a personal tragedy that still left him waking. In cold sweat some nights, Jackson's daily attire rarely varied. Blue Dickies coveralls with Jack embroidered on the chest pocket, steel-toed boots worn to a comfortable curve, and the faded blue cap that had once been navy when his wife Sarah had given it to him on their 10th anniversary shortly before the accident. His one concession to his former life was a dark brown leather jacket he occasionally wore on cooler days, a jacket with a single patch on the inside that he kept carefully folded when not wearing it. Today had started like any other Tuesday. Jackson arrived at 6:30 a.m. to handle paperwork before his assistant Miguel showed up at 8. He checked the schedule. Mrs. Patterson's Subaru needed its timing belt replaced, the Johnson's pickup was due for diagnostics on its transmission, and there were 3 oil changes booked for the afternoon. A comfortable routine. What wasn't? On the schedule was Amanda Wells, Regional Director of Vertex Automotive Industries, a major parts supplier and increasingly a developer of specialized vehicle systems. Jackson recognized her name immediately when she called that morning, requesting an urgent meeting. Vertex had been aggressively expanding, buying up patents and smaller engineering firms. What they wanted with his small-town repair shop, Jackson couldn't imagine. When Amanda Wells arrived precisely at 10:15 a.m., Jackson was finishing up with Mrs. Patterson's timing belt. He wiped his hands carefully on a shop rag, nodded to Miguel to close up the Subaru, and headed to the waiting area where Amanda had been impatiently checking her sleek smartphone. "Ms. Wells, Jackson Miller, what can I do for you today?" he asked, extending his hand, consciously aware of the ingrained grease in the creases of his palms. Amanda Wells barely touched his hand, her grip limp and brief. She was in her early 40s, sharply dressed in a tailored pantsuit that probably cost more than Jackson's monthly rent on the shop. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her makeup impeccable, her entire demeanor suggesting someone who considered this meeting far beneath her usual business dealings. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice precise and cool, "I'll be direct. Vertex Automotive is developing a new hybrid engine system, and we've hit some efficiency walls. Our engineers recommended looking at some older patents for inspiration. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that one of the most promising designs was attributed to a Dr. Jackson Miller, formerly of NASA Propulsion Systems." She paused, her perfectly sculpted eyebrow raising slightly. "A Dr. Miller who apparently now changes oil in a small-town garage." Jackson kept his expression neutral, though his heart had begun to pound. He hadn't thought about those patents in years, had deliberately avoided the engineering journals and industry news that might have mentioned his former work. "That was a lifetime ago, Ms. Wells. What's your interest in my old designs?" Amanda's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Vertex wants to acquire the rights to your combustion efficiency system, specifically patent US 8567234, filed in 2008. We're prepared to make a reasonable offer, though obviously the design is somewhat outdated now." Jackson knew that patent by heart. It had been his most innovative work, a method for increasing fuel efficiency while reducing emissions that had been ahead of its time. "That patent is still in my name, but I haven't developed it further. Since leaving NASA." "Yes, well," Amanda continued, her tone growing more condescending, "that's why our offer is merely inadequate. The concept has potential, but would require significant updating by actual working engineers to be viable in today's market. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." The dismissal in her tone was unmistakable. Jackson felt a familiar twinge, the same one he'd experienced repeatedly in the years after leaving NASA, people assuming he'd somehow lost his expertise along with his prestigious position, that a man in coveralls couldn't possibly retain the brilliance that had once earned him recognition in the field. "I see," Jackson said evenly, "and what exactly is Vertex offering?" Amanda named a figure that was insultingly low, less than what Jackson earned in 6 months at the repair shop. "Of course, we'd credit you as the original concept developer. In any publications," she added, as if that were a significant concession. Jackson leaned against the counter, considering his response carefully. In truth, he had continued developing that system over the years, tinkering in the small workshop behind his house late into the night when sleep evaded him. He had notebooks full of calculations, refinements, and improvements that no one had ever seen. The system Amanda dismissed as outdated had evolved substantially in the privacy of his own workspace. "Actually, Ms. Wells, I've made some improvements to that design over the years. Would you be interested in seeing the updated specifications?" Amanda's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Mr. Miller, with all due respect, tinkering with carburetors in your garage isn't the same as actual engineering development. Our team includes PhDs from MIT and Stanford. Unless you've got a fully equipped propulsion lab hidden behind your oil change bay, I doubt you've made advances our engineers couldn't achieve in an afternoon." Jackson felt his jaw tighten, but kept his voice measured. "Nevertheless, I'd be happy to show you my current designs before we discuss any acquisition. Fine, Amanda sighed, making no effort to hide her impatience, if it makes you feel better about the offer. Jackson went to his office, unlocked the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, and retrieved a thick folder. Inside were detailed technical drawings, performance calculations, and material specifications that represented thousands of hours of refinement. He returned to the counter and carefully laid out several key schematics. "This is the current iteration," he explained, pointing to a particularly detailed drawing. "I've modified the intake manifold geometry here and here, redesigned the combustion chamber to enhance the fuel-air mixture turbulence, and incorporated a variable valve timing system that adapts to load conditions." He continued explaining the technical specifics, his knowledge and expertise evident in every precise description. Amanda glanced at the drawings with barely concealed boredom. She picked up one detailed schematic, glanced at it for mere seconds, and set it down dismissively. "Mr. Miller, these are interesting amateur sketches, but they're hardly professional engineering specifications. And this prototype engine design? The calculations don't even account for thermal expansion coefficients correctly." Jackson frowned, pointing to a separate page of calculations. "The thermal considerations are detailed here, Ms. Wells, including variable coefficients for the ceramic composite components. This is just a regular auto shop, and you're just a grease monkey in overalls. There's no way you designed that prototype engine. Stop wasting my time," she sneered, tossing Jackson's detailed blueprints onto the oil-stained counter. "These designs look like something you copied from an engineering textbook without understanding the principles involved. They're theoretical at best, completely impractical at worst." Jackson felt a familiar flush of frustration. He'd encountered this attitude before. The assumption that a man who worked with his hands couldn't possibly possess the intellect for theoretical design work. It was part of why he'd retreated to Millfield after the accident, tired of the politics and prejudices of the corporate engineering world. "These designs are mine, ma'am," he replied quietly, gathering the scattered papers, "and they're fully implementable. I've built working prototypes." Amanda just laughed, her voice cutting through the small waiting area where Mrs. Patterson was now sitting waiting for her car. "Sure they are. Next you'll tell me you've got a rocket ship behind the garage. Look, Mr. Miller, I came as a courtesy because your name is on a patent we're interested in. Our legal team says we could probably challenge your ownership anyway, given the development was partially funded by government grants. So let's not play games. Take our offer, sign the rights over, and you can go back to changing oil filters." The bell above the door jingled as Miguel stepped in from the garage. "Boss, Mrs. Patterson's car is all set," he said, then paused, sensing the tension in the room. "Thank you, Miguel," Jackson nodded. He turned back to Amanda, who was already packing her sleek leather portfolio, clearly considering the meeting over. "Ms. Wells, I'm not interested in selling the patent at the price you've offered. If Vertex wants to make a serious proposal that reflects the actual value of the technology, I'm willing to listen. Otherwise, I'll continue developing it independently." Amanda snapped her portfolio closed with unnecessary force. "Mr. Miller, be realistic. You're a small-town mechanic. You don't have the resources or connections to bring this technology to market. Even if your drawings have merit, which I strongly doubt, you can't possibly navigate the manufacturing and regulatory landscape alone." Her tone was now openly patronizing. "This is your one chance to get something from work you abandoned years ago. I suggest you and take it." Just then, the weathered metal door of Crossroads Auto Repair swung open with unusual force, drawing every eye in the cramped waiting area. A striking woman in an immaculate charcoal suit, her presence commanding instant respect, stood framed in the doorway, sunlight glinting off a NASA insignia pin on her lapel. Her sharp gaze swept the room before settling on Jackson with unmistakable recognition, then dawning indignation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Director of Advanced Propulsion Systems at NASA, was not someone who typically visited small-town auto repair shops. Her precisely cut, silver-streaked black hair and commanding presence made her instantly recognizable to anyone in the aerospace engineering field. She stood for a moment, taking in the scene before her. Jackson behind the counter, blueprints scattered, and Amanda Wells with her dismissive posture. "Jack," Elena said warmly, striding forward and completely ignoring Amanda. "It's been too long." Jackson straightened, genuine surprise and pleasure crossing his weathered features. "Elena, what brings you to Millfield?" Elena smiled, though there was a determined edge to it. "You, actually. When I heard Vertex was sending someone to discuss your hybrid engine system, I decided it was time for a long-overdue visit." She turned to face Amanda, her expression cooling considerably. "Ms. Wells, I presume. I'm Dr. Elena Rodriguez, NASA Propulsion Systems." Amanda's demeanor shifted instantly, professional recognition overriding her previous condescension. "Dr. Rodriguez, this is unexpected. I wasn't aware NASA had an interest in this patent negotiation." "NASA always maintains interest in the groundbreaking work of its former scientists," Elena replied evenly. She glanced at the blueprints on the counter, especially when that work continues to evolve in ways that could revolutionize the field. She picked up one of Jackson's detailed drawings, examining it with obvious expertise. "Jack, you've implemented the ceramic matrix composite housing we discussed theoretically years ago, and these intake modifications." She traced a finger along the design. "Brilliant, absolutely brilliant." Amanda's expression flickered between confusion and disbelief. "You're familiar with Mr. Miller's work?" Elena looked at her as though she'd asked if the sun rises in the east. "Familiar? Ms. Wells, I've been trying to convince Jack to rejoin NASA's propulsion team for 15 years. The man you're so casually dismissing is one of the most innovative mechanical engineers of his generation. His combustion efficiency breakthroughs laid the groundwork for systems we're still developing." The atmosphere in the small waiting area had transformed. Mrs. Patterson, who had been pretending not to listen while flipping through an outdated magazine, was now openly staring. Miguel had stepped fully into the room, a proud smile spreading across his face as he watched his boss receive long-overdue recognition. Amanda cleared her throat, visibly recalibrating her approach. "I see. Well, Dr. Rodriguez, Vertex is prepared to properly develop this technology." "Vertex," Elena interrupted, "has been attempting to reverse engineer Jackson's designs for years without success. Your company has hired 3 separate teams of engineers who failed to replicate the efficiency parameters his original system achieved, and now you're here offering him—" She glanced at the contract peeking from Amanda's portfolio. "What I can only assume is a fraction of the technology's worth." Jackson, who had been quietly observing this exchange, finally spoke. "Elena, how did you know Vertex was sending someone today?" Elena's smile turned slightly mischievous. "Miguel called me." All eyes turned to the young assistant mechanic, who shrugged unapologetically. "The boss doesn't like to talk about his NASA days, but everyone around here knows. When this lady called asking about patents, I figured Dr. Rodriguez should know." Jackson felt a complex surge of emotions: gratitude toward Miguel for his loyalty, surprise at Elena's appearance, and a hint of the old confidence he'd once known as Dr. Miller, rather than just Jack the mechanic. He carefully gathered his blueprints, straightening the edges with practiced precision. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office," he suggested, gesturing toward the small room behind the counter. His voice remained steady, but those who knew him well might have noticed a subtle shift in his posture. Shoulders slightly straighter, chin raised just a fraction higher. Amanda Wells stood frozen for a moment, visibly recalculating her position. The condescension that had colored her every word and gesture just minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by a thinly veiled anxiety. Her company had sent her to secure a simple patent acquisition from a small-town mechanic, a routine task that was rapidly transforming into something far more complicated. Yes, that would be appropriate, she managed, clutching her portfolio tighter. As they moved toward the office, Mrs. Patterson stood up, her car keys jingling in her hand. "Jack," she called, her voice warm with newfound respect, "when you're done saving the world with your engines, my Subaru still makes that funny noise on cold mornings." Jackson smiled genuinely for the first time that day. "I'll look at it next week, Mrs. Patterson. Try that trick I showed you with the defroster in the meantime." The office of Crossroads Auto Repair was small, but meticulously organized. What visitors might have initially mistaken for a cluttered space revealed itself, upon closer inspection, to be a carefully arranged workshop of the mind. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled not with the expected automotive repair manuals, though those were present, but with advanced texts on thermodynamics, materials science, and engineering. A drafting table occupied one corner, its surface clean, but bearing the marks of regular use. The desk itself was old but solid oak, the kind not often found in repair shops. Jackson gestured for Elena and Amanda to take the two chairs facing his desk. As he settled into his own worn leather chair, he flipped over a small wooden sign on his desk that read, "The difference between ordinary and extraordinary is that little extra." It had been a gift from his late wife, a constant reminder of why he pursued excellence even when no one was watching. "Ms. Wells," Jackson began, his tone measured but now carrying an unmistakable authority, "I believe we should restart this conversation. You're interested in my hybrid engine system patent. I'm interested in ensuring that any technology I've developed is properly implemented and credited." Amanda nodded stiffly, her earlier dismissiveness nowhere in evidence. "Vertex remains interested in acquiring the rights to your patent, Dr. Miller, in light of additional information. I'm authorized to negotiate more favorable terms." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "Before we discuss terms, I think it's important that Ms. Wells understands exactly what technology we're talking about." She turned to Jackson. "Jack, why don't you show her the Firefly?" A flicker of hesitation crossed Jackson's weathered features. The Firefly was his most closely guarded project, a working prototype he'd built in his home workshop, incorporating all his advancements since leaving NASA. Only a handful of people knew of its existence. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "It might be best. Miss Wells, are you familiar with the concept of seeing is believing?" Without waiting for her response, Jackson stood and walked to what appeared to be a storage closet at the back of his office. He entered a code on a keypad hidden behind a calendar, a security measure that seemed out of place in a small-town repair shop. The door clicked open, revealing not supplies, but a narrow staircase leading downward. "This building was originally the town's first bank," Jackson explained, as he led them down the stairs. "This was the vault entrance. When I bought the property, I repurposed the underground space. What awaited them below defied all expectations. The former bank vault had been transformed into a sophisticated engineering laboratory. Computer workstations displayed complex simulations, specialized tools and measuring equipment lined the walls. In the center stood a glass-enclosed testing chamber, and within it a compact engine unlike any standard automotive power plant. "This," Jackson said with quiet pride, "is the Firefly, Generation 7 of my hybrid efficiency system." The engine was a marvel of engineering elegance, smaller than a conventional automotive engine, yet clearly designed for significant power output. Its configuration was unconventional, with components arranged in a pattern that seemed to defy traditional engine architecture. Amanda's professional facade cracked as she stared at the prototype. This can't be real." Elena smiled. "Oh, it's very real. Jack, show her what it can do." Jackson stepped to a control panel and initiated a startup sequence. The engine began to run with an eerily quiet hum rather than the expected mechanical roar. Digital displays showed performance metrics that seemed impossible. Efficiency, ratings that exceeded current market-leading systems by factors rather than percentages. The Firefly implements a modified Atkinson cycle with variable compression ratios, Jackson explained, his voice taking on the confident cadence of the engineer he'd always been beneath the mechanic's coveralls. The combustion chamber geometry creates a perfect swirl pattern for the fuel-air mixture, while the ceramic matrix composite housing eliminates thermal efficiency losses that plague conventional engines. He continued the technical explanation, each detail revealing the depth of innovation the small engine represented. This wasn't the work of a hobbyist or a has-been. It was cutting-edge engineering that could transform transportation energy efficiency. Amanda listened in growing astonishment, occasionally asking questions that revealed her own technical background, questions that Jackson answered with the easy confidence of someone who had spent thousands of hours refining every aspect of the system. The current prototype achieves 72% thermal efficiency, Jackson concluded. Conventional gasoline engines manage about 35%. Even the best hybrid systems on the market today top out around 40%. "This is revolutionary," Amanda admitted. Her earlier condescension completely evaporated. Vertex has teams of engineers who've been working for years to achieve 50% efficiency. "Which is why," Elena interjected, "NASA has maintained interest in Jack's work, even as he's chosen to pursue it independently." Jackson powered down the prototype and turned to face Amanda directly. "Ms. Wells, I'm not opposed to working with Vertex, but I won't be dismissed as just a mechanic whose work can be acquired for pennies on the dollar. This technology represents 15 years of development, and I have very specific requirements for how it's implemented." Amanda nodded, a new respect evident in her demeanor. "Dr. Miller, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions that were clearly unfounded. Vertex would be privileged to discuss a genuine partnership rather than a simple acquisition." As they returned upstairs to Jackson's office to begin preliminary discussions, Miguel knocked and poked his head in. "Boss, sorry to interrupt, but the Harper twins are here for their oil changes, and Mr. Johnson just dropped off his pickup for that transmission work." Jackson checked his watch. He'd lost track of time during the demonstration. "Tell them I'll be right there." Amanda looked surprised. "You're still going to change their oil? Fix Johnson's transmission?" Jackson finished for her. "Yes, Ms. Wells, those people depend on me. Their vehicles keep their lives running. I made commitments to them, and I honor my commitments." He stood, reaching for a clean shop rag from a drawer. "We can continue this conversation after I've taken care of my customers. Elena knows where the coffee maker is if you'd like some while you wait." As Jackson stepped out into the garage, pulling his faded blue cap back on, he felt a weight lifting that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. For 15 years, he'd kept his worlds separated, the brilliant engineer he had been and the reliable mechanic he had become. Today, those worlds had collided, and the result wasn't the catastrophe he'd feared, but something unexpectedly liberating. The Harper twins, teenage siblings who had saved for months to buy their first car, waited anxiously by their modest used sedan. "Is everything okay, Mr. Miller?" Sarah Harper asked. "We saw that fancy car outside and thought maybe you were closing the shop or something." Jackson smiled, grabbing his tools with practiced ease. Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. Now let's get this oil changed. Have you been checking the levels like I showed you? As he worked, Jackson found himself engaging with the twins more openly than usual, explaining the mechanics of what he was doing with the same precision and passion he'd just used to describe. The Firefly's combustion system. The teenagers listened with growing interest, asking questions that revealed genuine curiosity. "You know," Jackson said as he finished up wiping his hands on the shop rag, "if either of you ever wants to learn more about automotive engineering, I could use some part-time help around here. Miguel could use a break from time to time." The twins' eyes widened with excitement. "Really, Mr. Miller, you'd teach us?" Luke Harper asked. "Everyone starts somewhere," Jackson replied. "I started taking apart lawn-mower engines when I was younger than you." As the Harpers drove away, Jackson turned his attention to Mr. Johnson's pickup. The transmission issue was complex, requiring both diagnostic expertise and mechanical precision. As he worked, he was aware of Miguel moving around the garage, efficiently handling the routine tasks, while casting occasional curious glances toward the office where Amanda and Elena remained. "You knew, didn't you?" Jackson finally asked as they worked side by side for a moment. "About my background, even before today." Miguel nodded, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "My cousin works IT at the university library. I was using their computers one day and searched your name out of curiosity. Found some old engineering journals with your papers. Pretty heavy reading for a guy who barely passed high school physics, but I got the gist. You were a big deal." Jackson tightened a bolt with careful precision. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Miguel shrugged. "Figured you had your reasons for being here instead of some fancy lab. You treated me with respect, taught me everything I know about cars. What you did before didn't matter as much as who you are now." He paused. "But I gotta say, boss, that lady from Vertex looking at you like you were some backwoods nobody who couldn't tell a piston from a crankshaft, that didn't sit right." Jackson felt a surge of gratitude. "So you called Dr. Rodriguez?" "Found her email on the NASA website," Miguel confirmed. "Told her some corporate type was coming to hassle you about old patents. Didn't expect her to show up in person, though." Before Jackson could respond, the office door opened. Elena emerged, followed by Amanda, whose demeanor had transformed entirely from her earlier corporate arrogance. "Jack," Elena called, "we've outlined some preliminary points for discussion. When you're finished with your current work, perhaps we could continue?" Jackson nodded, turning back to the transmission. "Give me 30 minutes to get Mr. Johnson's pickup sorted." True to his word, Jackson completed the transmission repair efficiently, his hands moving with the practiced precision that had made Crossroads Auto Repair the most trusted shop in 3 counties. As he closed the hood and wiped his hands, he found himself reflecting on the strange turn his day had taken. For 15 years he had hidden his full capabilities from the world, retreating into the identity of Jack the mechanic after the accident that had claimed Sarah's life. The experimental aircraft crash had shaken his confidence in his own designs, led to months of investigations and recriminations, and ultimately driven him away from the cutting-edge engineering work he'd loved. Coming to Millfield, opening the repair shop, it had been a form of penance, a way to use his skills in a controlled environment where failures meant inconvenience, not tragedy. Yet he had never stopped innovating in private, working late nights in his converted bank vault laboratory, pursuing the perfect engine design with the same dedication he brought to every oil change and timing belt replacement. The Firefly wasn't just a technical achievement. It was proof to himself that he could still create, still contribute something meaningful to the world. As Jackson returned to his office, he found Amanda and Elena engaged in spirited technical discussion, the preliminary agreement between them on his desk. He washed his hands thoroughly in the small adjoining bathroom, then took his seat studying the document they'd drafted. The terms were reasonable, far better than Amanda's initial insulting offer. Vertex would provide manufacturing resources and regulatory navigation, while Jackson would maintain creative control over implementation and receive appropriate compensation and recognition. But as he read through the details, Jackson felt a familiar hesitation. "This is a solid starting point," he acknowledged, setting the document down. "But there's something fundamental missing." Elena raised an eyebrow. "What's that, Jack?" Jackson leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "Purpose. The Firefly wasn't designed just to be efficient or profitable. It was designed to make a difference." He turned to Amanda. "Before we go any further, I need to understand what Vertex intends to do with this technology. Will it be implemented broadly, making transportation more sustainable for everyone? Or will it be reserved for luxury vehicles and premium applications, another toy for those who can afford it?" Amanda shifted uncomfortably. "That's ultimately a business decision for the executive team." "No," Jackson interrupted firmly. "It's my decision because it's my technology. I didn't spend 15 years perfecting this design for it to become another way to separate the haves from the have-nots." The office fell silent. Through the window, Jackson could see Miguel helping an elderly customer to her car, taking the time to explain the maintenance he'd performed, treating her with the same respect he'd show anyone. That was the ethos Jackson had built into Crossroads. Auto repair, service without prejudice, excellence without pretension. "You know," Elena said finally, breaking the silence, "NASA's original interest in your efficiency systems wasn't just about spacecraft propulsion. It was about the potential applications for addressing climate challenges here on Earth." Jackson nodded. "That was always my motivation. Sarah and I—" He paused, the name of his late wife still sometimes catching in his throat even after 15 years. Sarah was an environmental scientist. She believed technological innovation was essential to addressing climate change. The efficiency systems I developed at NASA were inspired by her work. He stood up, walking to the small window that overlooked the repair bay. "After she died, I couldn't face the high-profile world of aerospace engineering anymore. But I never stopped working toward what we both believed in. The Firefly is the culmination of that work, an engine design that could significantly reduce emissions while improving performance, applicable to everything from family sedans to commercial trucks." Amanda was watching him with new understanding. "You're not just concerned about credit or compensation. You want to ensure the technology fulfills its intended purpose." "Exactly," Jackson confirmed. "If Vertex wants this technology, I need guarantees about implementation and accessibility. It needs to reach ordinary people, people like the Harpers with their first used car, or Mrs. Patterson with her 10-year-old Subaru. Otherwise, what's the point?" Elena smiled, a look of pride crossing her features. "This is the Jackson Miller I remember, always asking the essential questions that everyone else overlooked." Jackson returned to his desk, pulling a worn leather jacket from the coat rack beside it. He rarely wore it during work hours, but something about this moment felt right. He slipped it on over his coveralls, then deliberately folded back the right lapel to reveal a patch sewn on the inside, the NASA Propulsion Laboratory insignia with a special commendation embroidered below it, "For exceptional innovation in service to humanity." "This was presented to me when my first efficiency system was implemented," he explained quietly. "Not because it was technically impressive, though it was, but because of its potential impact. That's what matters to me, the impact." Amanda stared at the patch, understanding dawning in her eyes. This wasn't just an engineer's pride or a collector's memento. It was a reminder of purpose, a personal mission statement worn close to the heart, but hidden from casual view, much like the brilliant mind behind the mechanic's coveralls. "Dr. Miller," she said, his proper title now coming naturally to her lips. I believe Vertex can work with these requirements. In fact, our CEO has been pushing for more accessible green technology initiatives. Your conditions might align perfectly with the direction he's trying to take the company. Jackson nodded, a cautious optimism building within him. Then I think we have something to discuss, but first, he glanced at his watch. I promised Mr. Johnson his pickup would be ready by 5, and I need to call Mrs. Henderson about her brake pads. As he reached for the phone, still wearing the jacket with the NASA patch now visible, Jackson caught Elena's amused expression. What? He asked. Nothing, she replied with a smile. It's just good to see both sides of you finally coexisting, the brilliant Dr. Miller and Jack the mechanic. They're both essential parts of who you are. Jackson considered this as he dialed Mrs. Henderson's number. For 15 years, he had compartmentalized his life, keeping his past achievements and continued innovations separate from his daily work. But perhaps there was a better way forward, one that honored both his extraordinary intellect and his commitment to serving his community with ordinary maintenance and repairs. As he spoke with Mrs. Henderson about her car, Jackson found himself explaining the brake system with the same clarity and enthusiasm he'd used when describing the Firefly. On the other end of the line, he could hear her increased engagement, her questions becoming more specific as she responded to his evident passion for even this routine aspect of automotive care. When he hung up, Amanda was watching him with newfound respect. You really do care about all of it, don't you? The groundbreaking innovations and the everyday repairs. Jackson nodded, running a hand along the worn edge of his desk. Excellence isn't about what you're doing, it's about how you do it. Whether I'm designing a revolutionary engine or changing spark plugs, the commitment to quality is the same. He smiled slightly. My wife used to say that true mastery shows itself in the smallest details. As the afternoon progressed, a subtle transformation was taking place within the modest confines of Crossroads Auto Repair. Word had somehow spread through the small town of Millfield about the distinguished visitor from NASA and the corporate executive from Vertex Automotive. In a community where news traveled faster than the speed limit on Highway 83, it wasn't. Long before curious locals began finding reasons to stop by the shop, Mayor Jenkins suddenly remembered he needed his headlights checked. Principal Woodward from the high school dropped in about a rattling noise that had mysteriously developed that very afternoon. Even Pastor Mitchell, whose ancient Volvo had been running perfectly for years, appeared with concerns about his tire pressure. Each visitor cast curious glances toward Jackson's office, where the door remained partially open, revealing glimpses of intense discussion. They noted the leather jacket Jackson now wore over his usual coveralls, the NASA patch clearly visible whenever he stepped out to address a customer's question or check on Miguel's progress with the regular repairs. By 4:30, the small waiting area had filled with townspeople pretending to read outdated magazines while straining to hear snippets of conversation from the office. Mrs. Patterson, who had returned ostensibly to retrieve a forgotten scarf, had become the unofficial greeter, whispering to each new arrival, Jack's not just a mechanic, he's some kind of NASA genius. That lady in the fancy suit tried to cheat him, but then a space scientist showed up. Inside the office, oblivious to the growing audience outside, Jackson, Elena, and Amanda had moved past preliminaries into detailed technical discussions. The conference call with Vertex's CEO had gone surprisingly well, with Jackson clearly articulating his vision for the technology's implementation. Now they were deep in the specifics of how the Firefly system could be adapted for mass production while maintaining its revolutionary efficiency. The ceramic matrix composite housing is the primary manufacturing challenge, Jackson explained, sketching a cross-section on his notepad. Current automotive production lines aren't set up for these materials, but aerospace has been using similar components for years. Elena nodded, pointing to a specific area of the drawing. NASA's contractor network has developed more cost-effective production methods recently. I could connect Vertex with several who might be willing to adapt their processes for automotive scale. Amanda, who had abandoned her earlier condescension entirely, was taking detailed notes on her tablet. Our facility in Michigan could potentially be retooled for this. The initial capital investment would be significant, but if these efficiency numbers hold in large-scale testing, they will, Jackson stated with quiet confidence. I've verified the performance metrics across multiple prototypes and scale models. The principles are sound. Their discussion was interrupted by a gentle knock. Miguel stood in the doorway, looking slightly overwhelmed. "Boss, sorry to interrupt, but the shop is getting kind of crowded. Everyone in town seems to need car help all of a sudden." Jackson glanced past his assistant to see the waiting area filled with familiar faces, none making any effort to hide their curiosity. He sighed, though a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Small towns," he murmured to Elena and Amanda. "No secrets." "Perhaps we should take a break," Elena suggested, checking her watch. "We've been at this for hours and I could use some fresh air." Jackson nodded, suddenly aware of his own fatigue. The day had been emotionally and mentally taxing in ways he hadn't experienced in years. "Good idea. There's a decent diner across the street. We can continue there after I sort out this sudden rush of automotive emergencies." As they stepped out of the office, the waiting room fell into an awkward silence, everyone suddenly fascinated by the outdated magazines in their hands or the ceiling tiles above. Jackson suppressed a chuckle at the transparent pretense. "Folks," he addressed the room, "I appreciate your concern for your vehicles, but unless there's a genuine emergency, Miguel and I will need to schedule most of these checkups for later this week." Mayor Jenkins cleared his throat, his planned excuse for being there evaporating under Jackson's knowing gaze. "Well, Jack, truth is, we're all just a bit curious about what's happening. Doris at the diner said she saw a NASA car parked outside, and then Hank mentioned a fancy corporate type was here, and, well, you all decided to stage an invasion of my waiting room," Jackson finished for him, no real annoyance in his tone. These were his neighbors, his community for 15 years. Their curiosity came from genuine care, however awkwardly expressed. Elena stepped forward, her natural authority drawing all eyes. "I'm Dr. Elena Rodriguez, from NASA's Propulsion Laboratory. I'm here because Jackson Miller, or Jack as you know him, is one of the most brilliant engineers I've ever worked with, and his innovations continue to be of great interest to our agency." A murmur rippled through the gathered townspeople. Though many had heard rumors of Jack's past over the years, hearing it confirmed so directly by someone of Elena's stature made it suddenly, undeniably real. "Jack's engine designs," Elena continued, "could revolutionize transportation efficiency and help address climate challenges. We're discussing how best to bring this technology to market for the benefit of everyone." Principal Woodward, a tall man with thoughtful eyes, spoke up. "All these years fixing our cars, and you had this other life we knew nothing about?" Jackson adjusted his cap slightly, a gesture his friends recognized as discomfort with being the center of attention. "Not a separate life exactly, just different. Applications of the same skills and principles. Engineering is engineering, whether it's spacecraft propulsion or Mrs. Patterson's Subaru." "But why here?" asked Pastor Mitchell. "Why Millfield? You could have worked anywhere." A momentary shadow crossed Jackson's features, a glimpse of the old grief that his closest friends knew to respect. "After my wife died, I needed simplicity. Purpose without pressure, fixing things that stay on the ground. He glanced around the room, his expression warming. Turned out to be the right decision. Amanda, who had been observing this interaction with fascination, stepped forward. As a representative of Vertex Automotive, I can tell you that Dr. Miller's decision to settle in Millfield has likely benefited all of us. The work he's continued here, away from corporate pressures and institutional constraints, has produced innovations that might never have emerged otherwise. The gathered townspeople seemed to swell with collective pride. Their Jack, the man who had fixed their transmissions, taught their teenagers to change oil, and never charged Mrs. Holloway full price after her husband died, was being recognized as the genius they had always suspected him to be. Mayor Jenkins, ever the politician, sensed an opportunity. This sounds like exactly the kind of innovation Millfield should be celebrating. Jack, what would you think about the town hosting some sort of event when this all becomes public? Put Millfield on the map as the birthplace of this revolutionary engine technology. Before Jackson could respond, the door to the shop swung open again, admitting a lanky teenager with unruly hair and a determined expression. It was Sean Harper, the older brother of the twins, who had been in earlier for their oil change. "Mr. Miller," he said, slightly out of breath, "I just heard from Sarah and Luke about what's happening. Is it true you're looking for helpers at the shop?" Jackson nodded, somewhat bemused by the teenager's urgency. "I mentioned the possibility." "Yes, why?" Sean straightened, gathering his courage. "Sir, I'm in the robotics club at school. We're building an electric vehicle for a competition, but we've hit some walls with the power management system. If you're really who they say, I mean, if you really designed engines for NASA, maybe you could take a look, and maybe I could work here and learn from you." The simple, earnest request cut through the growing spectacle of the moment, reminding Jackson of what mattered most to him. Passing on knowledge, mentoring the next generation, making a tangible difference in individual lives. "I'd be happy to look at your project, Sean," he said warmly. "As for working here, if you're half as responsible as your siblings, we can certainly arrange something." Sean's face lit up with genuine excitement. "Thank you, sir. The team will be so psyched. We meet Thursdays after school in the shop classroom." Principal Woodward stepped forward, sudden inspiration in his eyes. "Jack, would you consider doing more than just helping the robotics club? Our STEM program has been struggling for years. If someone with your background could occasionally guest lecture, maybe mentor some projects?" Jackson felt Elena's knowing gaze on him. For years, she had tried to convince him to teach at the university level, to share his knowledge more broadly. He had always declined, protective of his privacy and his carefully constructed life in Millfield. But now, with his worlds colliding so publicly, different possibilities were emerging. "I might be able to arrange something," he allowed, surprised by his own willingness. "Though I'm not sure how inspiring it would be for students to learn from someone in oil-stained coveralls." "Are you kidding?" Sean interjected with teenage bluntness. "That would make it awesome. You actually build stuff, not just talk about it. And you know how things really work, not just the theory." A chorus of agreement rose from the gathered townspeople, their perspective on their local mechanic shifting before his eyes, not diminishing their respect for Jack, who fixed their cars, but expanding to embrace the fuller picture of the man he had always been. The moment was interrupted by the rumbling of several stomachs, prompting laughter and a general acknowledgement that the impromptu town meeting had gone on long enough. "Folks," Jackson said with gentle firmness, "I appreciate all your interest and support, but I still have a transmission to finish before closing, and I suspect Doris is wondering why her diner is empty at the dinner hour." Taking the hint, the crowd began to disperse, each person taking a moment to pat Jackson on the shoulder or offer a word of congratulations as they left. Soon, only Mayor Jenkins remained, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Jack," he said quietly. "I've known you 15 years, and I always sensed there was more to your story. Never pushed because it wasn't my business. But I want you to know, whatever comes of all this engine business, whatever attention it brings, Millfield is your home for as long as you want it to be. We've got your back." The simple declaration of community support touched Jackson deeply. He had chosen Millfield for its anonymity, its distance from his former life. He had never expected to find such profound belonging. "Thank you, Harold," he replied simply. "That means more than you know." As the mayor departed, Jackson turned back to Elena and Amanda, who had witnessed the entire scene with varying degrees of amazement. "Is it always like this?" Amanda asked, gesturing to the now empty waiting room that had moments ago held what seemed like half the town. Jackson shrugged, a smile playing at his lips. "Millfield takes care of its own, even the transplants like me." He checked his watch. "Miguel, can you finish up Mr. Johnson's transmission? I need about an hour with Dr. Rodriguez and Ms. Wells, and then I'll be back to help close up." Miguel nodded, his usual easygoing expression replaced by something approaching reverence. "No problem, boss. Take all the time you need, and it's really cool what's happening. You deserve it." The three made their way across the street to Doris's Diner, a local institution with checkered tablecloths and the best apple pie in 3 counties. As they entered, every head turned, conversations pausing momentarily before resuming with increased animation. Doris herself, a formidable woman in her 60s with impeccably dyed red hair, ushered them to a corner booth with a clear view of the auto shop across the street. "Coffee's fresh," she announced, filling 3 mugs without asking. "And Jack's. Usual table is ready, though I suspect you're not just having your regular BLT today." She eyed Elena and Amanda with undisguised curiosity. "Special guests deserve special treatment. The daily special is meatloaf, but I can whip up anything you fancy." After they ordered, Elena leaned back in the booth, studying Jackson with thoughtful eyes. "You've built a good life here, Jack, different from what any of us expected for you after Sarah died, but a good one." Jackson nodded, stirring sugar into his coffee. "It was what I needed. Simple problems with clear solutions. People who valued skill and honesty over credentials and reputation." He glanced out the window at his shop. "I never planned to stay this long. Thought I'd work through my grief and eventually go back to engineering. But somewhere along the way, this became home." "And yet," Amanda observed, "you never stopped engineering. You just did it on your own terms, without institutional constraints or corporate pressures. That freedom is what made the Firefly possible," Jackson acknowledged. "In a conventional R&D environment, many of my approaches would have been dismissed as too unconventional, too risky. Here, answerable only to myself, I could follow every promising lead, no matter how unorthodox." Their food arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. Doris lingered a moment longer than necessary, clearly hoping to overhear something newsworthy, before reluctantly returning to the counter where several other patrons were making equally poor attempts to disguise their eavesdropping. Elena waited until they'd eaten a few bites before continuing. "Jack, there's something I haven't mentioned yet, something beyond Vertex's interest in your work." She set down her fork, her expression serious. "NASA is establishing a new civilian advisory board for sustainable transportation technologies. The White House is backing it as part of their climate initiative. They want you on it." Jackson nearly choked on his meatloaf. "Me? Elena, I've been out of the aerospace world for 15 years. I fix carburetors and change brake pads now, and design revolutionary hybrid engines in your spare time," she countered. "Jack, your Firefly system is exactly the kind of innovation this initiative needs. You wouldn't need to leave Millfield. Most of the work is remote, with quarterly meetings in Washington. But your perspective, your expertise, would be invaluable. Amanda, far from being threatened by NASA's interest, looked intrigued. Actually, this could complement our partnership perfectly. Vertex could handle commercial implementation, while Dr. Miller advises on broader policy applications. Jackson's mind raced with possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. His self-imposed exile from the engineering world had become so habitual that he'd stopped questioning it. But now, with both NASA and Vertex recognizing the value of his continued work, different pathways were emerging. "I'd need to maintain the shop," he said finally, "not just for income, but because it matters to me, to the community." Elena smiled, relieved he wasn't rejecting the idea outright. "No one's asking you to stop being Jack the mechanic. We're just suggesting that Dr. Miller has contributions to make as well. The world needs both sides of you." Jackson gazed out the window at Crossroads Auto Repair, where Miguel was now explaining something to Sean Harper, who had apparently returned with questions about the potential job. The simple scene, a skilled worker passing knowledge to the next generation, embodied everything he valued about his life in Millfield. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I started the shop as a retreat, a way to step back from a world that had become too painful after Sarah died. I thought simplifying my life meant limiting my contributions to fixing engines rather than designing them." He smiled slightly. "Never occurred to me I could do both." Amanda, who had begun the day viewing Jackson as merely an obstacle to a routine patent acquisition, now regarded him with genuine respect. "Dr. Miller, I believe you've been underestimating your capacity for impact. You've maintained your expertise and innovation while building a business that clearly means a great deal to this community. That's not limitation, that's expansion." "Dean," the simple observation struck Jackson with unexpected force. For 15 years, he had viewed his life in Millfield as a narrowing of his horizons, a deliberate stepping back from the larger contributions he once made. But perhaps, as Amanda suggested, he had actually been expanding in less visible but equally meaningful ways, building relationships, serving a community, mentoring young people like Miguel, and now, potentially, the Harper siblings. "There's an old Zen saying," Elena offered, noting his thoughtful expression. "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The tasks may remain the same, but the perspective transforms." Jackson nodded slowly. "I came to Millfield to chop wood and carry water, to do simple, honest work with my hands while my heart healed. Never expected to find enlightenment. In a transmission fluid change." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the diner window, they could see a sleek bus pulling up in front of Crossroads Auto Repair. The side of the vehicle bore the Millfield High School logo and robotics team in bold letters. "What in the world?" Jackson murmured, watching, as at least 15 teenagers spilled out of the bus, led by an enthusiastic Sean Harper, who was gesturing wildly toward the shop. Principal Woodward entered the diner, making a beeline for their table. "Jack, I hope you don't mind. When Sean told the robotics team about meeting you, they insisted on bringing their electric vehicle project right away. It's actually in the school bus. Well, strapped to the top of it. They're hoping you might take a look." Jackson stared at Principal Woodward, then at the growing crowd of eager teenagers outside his shop. For a moment he felt overwhelmed by the rapid dissolution of the carefully constructed boundaries between his private and public lives. But as he watched the students' excited faces through the diner window, something shifted inside him, a recognition that perhaps these boundaries had been self-imposed limitations rather than necessary protections. "I'll be right there," he told Woodward, finishing his coffee in a quick gulp. He turned to Elena and Amanda. "Looks like our discussion will have to continue later." Elena smiled knowingly. "Go. This is more important than paperwork and policies. This is exactly why your work matters, for them. As Jackson crossed the street toward his shop, now surrounded by enthusiastic teenagers, he felt strangely light, as though the NASA patch on his jacket, hidden for so many years, had been weighing him down rather than the other way around. The Millfield High School robotics team's project was indeed strapped to the top of their bus, a sleek, low-profile vehicle with an aerodynamic shell that showed impressive attention to design principles, despite its obviously limited budget. The students swarmed around Jackson as he approached, their energy and excitement palpable. "Mr. Miller, Sean said you worked for NASA. Is that true? Can you help us with our battery configuration? The motor keeps overheating after 10 minutes. Did you really design engines for spacecraft?" The questions came rapid fire, the teenagers showing none of the cautious respect adults had demonstrated. Their enthusiasm was unfiltered, their curiosity unhesitant. Jackson found himself responding to their energy, answering questions directly as Miguel and several parents helped carefully lower the project vehicle from the bus roof. "Yes, I worked at NASA's propulsion laboratory for 12 years. Yes, I can look at your battery configuration. Overheating usually indicates inefficient energy transfer or inadequate cooling. And I designed propulsion systems, not complete spacecraft, though the principles are similar regardless of what you're powering." Sean Harper, clearly enjoying his newfound status as the one who discovered Mr. Miller's hidden expertise, orchestrated the chaos with surprising effectiveness. "Let's get the EV into the bay so Mr. Miller can see it properly. Jess, bring the diagnostic laptop. Marco, get the system schematics ready." Jackson watched with growing admiration as the students organized themselves, each taking responsibility for different aspects of the presentation. Despite their youth and limited resources, they showed remarkable dedication to their project, a miniature electric vehicle designed to compete in a regional efficiency challenge. Once the vehicle was positioned in one of the repair bays, the team's faculty advisor, a young science teacher named Ms. Chen, approached Jackson with an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry for the invasion, Mr. Miller. When Sean came tearing into our after-school meeting with the news that you might be willing to advise us, there was no containing their excitement. We've been stuck on these power management issues for weeks." Jackson waved away her concern. "No apology needed. I'm impressed by what I'm seeing already." He gestured toward the vehicle. "That aerodynamic shell design shows real understanding of drag reduction principles." Ms. Chen's face brightened. "That was Alicia's work. She's planning to study aerospace engineering, actually. She'll be over the moon to get feedback from someone with your background." As if summoned by the mention of her name, a serious-looking girl with a neat braid and wire-rimmed glasses stepped forward, clutching a tablet with technical drawings. "Mr. Miller, I referenced NASA's design specifications for the shell geometry, but we had to modify the equations for our limited fabrication capabilities. Do you think our adaptations maintained sufficient aerodynamic integrity?" The question was asked with such earnest technical precision that Jackson had to suppress a smile. Here was a young mind already thinking like an engineer, adapting theoretical ideals to practical constraints, exactly the kind of problem-solving he valued most. "Let's take a look at your calculations," he said, accepting the tablet. As he reviewed her work, Jackson felt something awakening within him. The teacher he had never allowed himself to become, the mentor he might have been to countless young engineers had he remained in his former field. For the next hour, Jackson moved among the students, examining their electric vehicle from bumper to bumper, asking questions that challenged their assumptions without dismissing their efforts. He found himself slipping naturally between the practical language of the garage and the technical terminology of engineering, creating bridges between theory and application that visibly energized the students. When he finally identified the primary issue with their power management system, an elegant but flawed cooling approach that was causing thermal bottlenecks, the solution came not as a directive, but as a guided discovery. What happens to electrical resistance as temperature increases? He asked the group gathered around the open power unit. It increases, several students answered in unison. And what happens to efficiency when resistance increases? It decreases, came the chorus. So if your system is overheating after 10 minutes, Jackson continued, leading them step by step, what might that tell you about your cooling approach? A lanky boy named Marco frowned thoughtfully. That our current cooling system isn't removing heat fast enough to prevent rising resistance? Exactly, Jackson confirmed. But before you completely redesign your cooling system, consider this. Is there a way to reduce the heat generation at its source? The question hung in the air for a moment before Alicia's eyes widened with realization. The controller circuitry. If we reconfigure it to pulse the power more efficiently, we could reduce the initial heat load, thereby making your existing cooling system more adequate, Jackson concluded with an approving nod. Sometimes the best solution isn't adding more cooling, but generating less heat in the first place. The students erupted in excited discussion, immediately breaking into smaller groups to tackle different aspects of the solution. Jackson stepped back, watching as they sketched new circuit designs and debated implementation approaches with an enthusiasm that reminded him powerfully of his own early days in engineering. Elena and Amanda had followed him from the diner and now stood observing from near the shop entrance. Elena's expression was one of quiet vindication. She'd always believed Jackson needed to share his knowledge more broadly. Amanda watched, with growing respect, seeing yet another dimension of the man she had so dramatically underestimated that morning. "You're a natural teacher," Elena commented, as Jackson joined them momentarily. "Always were, even at NASA. The junior engineers used to fight for assignments on your projects." Jackson glanced back at the students, now deeply engaged in their work. "I'd forgotten how rewarding it is, seeing that moment when a concept clicks, when theory connects to practice." "This is what I meant earlier," Amanda added. "Your impact has been expanding in ways you haven't fully recognized. These students will carry what they learn from you far beyond Millfield." Before Jackson could respond, Sean Harper approached, his expression a mix of excitement and hesitation. "Mr. Miller," the team was wondering, "would you consider being our official technical advisor for the competition? Ms. Chen is great with the organizational stuff, but we really need someone who understands both the engineering theory and the hands-on implementation." The request was so sincere, so hopeful, that Jackson found himself nodding before he'd fully considered the implications. "I'd be honored, Sean. When's the competition?" 6 weeks from now in Indianapolis," the boy replied, his face lighting up. "We meet every Tuesday and Thursday after school, and Saturday mornings when we're in crunch time, which honestly we are now." Jackson smiled. "Then I guess we'd better get back to work on that controller circuitry redesign." As he returned to the students, Jackson caught Miguel watching him with a knowing grin. "What?" he asked his assistant. Miguel shrugged. "Just thinking the shop might need to adjust its hours to accommodate your new teaching schedule, boss, and maybe clear some space in Bay 3 for robotics equipment." The simple acceptance in Miguel's tone, the assumption that Jackson's expanded role in the community was a natural evolution rather than a disruption, touched him deeply. For 15 years, Jackson had feared that embracing his engineering background would somehow diminish his identity as Millfield's reliable mechanic. Now he was beginning to see that integration was not only possible, but potentially transformative, for himself and for others. As the evening progressed, the auto shop transformed into an impromptu engineering laboratory. Parents began arriving, initially to collect their children, but many stayed, watching with growing interest as Jackson guided the team through systematic problem-solving approaches that blended theoretical principles with practical garage wisdom. Mayor Jenkins returned, accompanied by several town council members who observed the scene with obvious pride. The local newspaper editor arrived with a camera, capturing images of Jackson in his NASA patch jacket leaning over circuit diagrams. With eager students, even Doris from the diner appeared, bearing trays of sandwiches and cookies for the future engineers and their NASA advisor. Udril, what had begun as a simple patent negotiation, had evolved into something far more significant, a community's discovery of the extraordinary individual who had been quietly serving them for years, and one man's rediscovery of the full spectrum of his potential contribution to the world. As the impromptu workshop finally wound down around 9 o'clock, with parents insisting that even future engineering champions needed sleep on school nights, Jackson found himself surrounded by a circle of grateful students and adults. Principal Woodward stepped forward, his expression solemn. "Jack, I don't think I'm speaking just for myself when I say that what happened here tonight feels like the beginning of something important for Millfield. Our students have talent and drive, but they've lacked exposure to true excellence in scientific fields. What you shared with them today, not just knowledge but an approach to problem-solving, that's a gift beyond measure." Murmurs of agreement rose from the gathered parents. Ms. Chen nodded emphatically. "The way you connected abstract principles to practical applications, that's exactly what these students need. Theory becomes real when they can see its implementation." Mayor Jenkins, never one to miss an opportunity, cleared his throat importantly. "Jack, I've been talking with the council members here and we have a proposition. The old Wilson property next to the high school, the town acquired it last year for back taxes. We've been debating what to do with it. What would you think about establishing some kind of technical education center there? A place where your expertise could benefit not just the robotics team, but all our students interested in engineering and applied sciences." The proposal caught Jackson completely off guard. "Harold, I'm just a mechanic who happens to know something about engineering. I'm not qualified to—" "Stop right there," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "You are Dr. Jackson Miller, one of the most innovative propulsion engineers NASA has ever employed. You hold 12 patents. Your combustion efficiency systems are still the benchmark in the field. And," she added with emphasis, "you're a gifted teacher who can translate complex concepts into practical understanding. If anyone is qualified, it's you." Amanda, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "If I may offer a perspective from Vertex, our company would be very interested in supporting such an initiative, not just as part of our agreement regarding the Firefly technology, but as an investment in future talent development. Technical education centers that bridge theory and application are exactly what the industry needs." Jackson looked around at the faces watching him expectantly. The students, still buzzing with excitement from their breakthroughs, the parents hoping for expanded opportunities for their children, his neighbors seeing new possibilities for their town's future. For 15 years, he had defined himself primarily by what he had lost and what he had left behind. Now, they were asking him to define himself by what he could create and what he could offer. "I'd need to think about it," he said finally. "This is a lot to process in one day." Principal Woodward nodded understandingly. "Of course, Jack. Just know that the offer stands, and there's broad support for whatever level of involvement you're comfortable with." As the crowd finally dispersed and the last students were herded onto the bus with promises to return for the next robotics meeting, Jackson found himself alone in his shop with Elena and Amanda. The three sat in the waiting area, surrounded by the familiar scents of motor oil and the new energy of possibility. "Quite a day," Elena observed with characteristic understatement. "When I flew in this morning, I expected to help you negotiate a fair deal for your patent. I didn't expect to witness the birth of the Millfield Technical Education Center." Jackson shook his head, still processing the whirlwind of events. "It's too much, too fast. I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of visibility, that kind of responsibility." "Are you sure about that?" Amanda asked gently. "Because what I saw today was a man completely in his element, bridging worlds that are usually kept separate: academic theory and practical application, corporate innovation and community education. You moved between those worlds effortlessly, Jack, as though you were always meant to connect them." Her observation resonated uncomfortably with truths Jackson had been avoiding for years. His compartmentalized life, keeping his engineering brilliance separate from his identity as Millfield's mechanic, had been a response to trauma, a way of managing grief and uncertainty after Sarah's death. But perhaps it had outlived its purpose, becoming a limitation rather than a protection. "Sarah always said I was meant to teach," he admitted quietly. "She thought my real gift wasn't designing engines, but helping others understand how things work, breaking down complexity into manageable parts." Elena smiled. "She was right. I remember how you'd walk junior engineers through problems at NASA, never giving them the answer, but helping them discover it themselves. That's a rare talent, Jack, one that shouldn't be hidden." Jackson stood and walked to the large window overlooking the now empty garage bays. For 15 years, this shop had been his sanctuary, his place of focused purpose and limited responsibility. The prospect of expanding beyond its walls, of reclaiming aspects of his former identity while maintaining his place in Millfield, was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I need time," he said finally, "to think, to plan, to figure out what's actually possible versus what's just excitement of the moment." "Of course," Elena agreed. "NASA's advisory board position will still be there when you're ready, and Vertex isn't going anywhere." Amanda nodded. "We can finalize the patent agreement tomorrow. As for the rest, the potential educational initiative, your level of involvement with our R&D team, those discussions can evolve at whatever pace works for you." Their understanding calmed some of Jackson's anxiety. He wasn't being asked to transform his life overnight, to abandon the shop or the community he'd come to love. Rather, he was being invited to expand, to integrate aspects of himself that he had kept artificially separated. "One step at a time," he murmured, almost to himself. It had been his mantra after Sarah's death, a way to make each day manageable. When grief threatened to overwhelm him, perhaps it could serve now as a guide through this unexpected new chapter. As Elena and Amanda prepared to leave, Elena to her hotel room for the night, Amanda to begin drafting the revised agreement. For Vertex, Jackson reached for his leather jacket, his fingers tracing the NASA patch that had remained hidden for so long. Today, for the first time in 15 years, he had worn it openly, allowing both parts of his identity to exist simultaneously. The world hadn't ended. In fact, something new and promising had begun. "Jack," Elena said, pausing at the door, "whatever you decide about the education center, the advisory board, all of it, just remember what we saw today. Those students, this community, they need what you have to offer. All of what you have to offer." After they had gone, Jackson locked up the shop and walked slowly to his truck, his mind still processing the extraordinary events of the day. As he drove through the quiet streets of Millfield toward his small house on Elm Street, he passed the high school, and adjacent to it, the old Wilson property that Mayor Jenkins had mentioned. In the moonlight, he could make out the abandoned building that had once been a small manufacturing facility. He pulled over, killing the engine, and sat looking at the property for a long moment. In his mind's eye, he could suddenly see what it might become. Not just a classroom or a workshop, but a place where theory and practice converged, where students could move seamlessly between conceptual understanding and hands-on implementation. A place that embodied the integration he was now contemplating in his own life. Reaching into his glove compartment, Jackson retrieved a small notebook he kept for recording maintenance schedules and parts inventories. Flipping to a blank page, he began to sketch, not engine components or mechanical systems, but a floor. In plan, classrooms opening into workshop spaces, theoretical instruction flowing naturally into practical application. A design that physically embodied the bridging of worlds that had been his unique gift all along. As the sketch took shape beneath his practiced hand, Jackson felt a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place that had been misaligned for too long. He thought of Sarah, of how she would have encouraged this evolution, this healing integration of his compartmentalized life. "One step at a time," he said aloud in the quiet truck cab. But for the first time in 15 years, he was allowing himself to see beyond the next step to a broader pathway, one where Jackson Miller, small-town mechanic, and Dr. Miller, NASA engineer, weren't separate identities, but complementary aspects of a whole person with unique contributions to make. As he tucked the notebook away and started his truck again, Jackson noticed that his hands, those calloused, oil-stained hands that had rebuilt engines and redesigned propulsion systems with equal skill, were steady. The weight that had lifted when he first revealed the NASA patch seemed even lighter now, replaced by a quiet certainty that had eluded him for 15 years. The patch on his jacket, hidden for so long, revealed today by circumstance and necessity, had become more than an emblem of his past achievements. It now represented a future of integration, of expanded purpose, of walls coming down between worlds he had kept separate for too long. "They called him just a mechanic," Jackson murmured, recalling Amanda's initial dismissive attitude with a smile that held no bitterness, until they saw the patch on his jacket. But the greater revelation hadn't been for Amanda, or even for the townspeople of Millfield. It had been for Jackson himself, the recognition that limiting his identity had limited his impact, that embracing the fullness of who he was opened doors not just for himself, but for an entire community. As he pulled into his driveway, Jackson Miller, mechanic, engineer, mentor, innovator, felt the quiet satisfaction of a man who had glimpsed his true potential and found it both humbling and inspiring. Tomorrow would bring practical discussions, contracts, decisions about next steps. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, he allowed himself to dream beyond the boundaries he had so carefully constructed, and found that the view was more expansive and full of possibility than he had ever imagined. 6 weeks later, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Crossroads Auto Repair. The shop's usual assortment of vehicles awaiting service had been joined by an unusual addition, a sleek, aerodynamic electric vehicle perched proudly on a custom trailer. Its midnight blue shell gleamed with freshly applied decals. Millfield High Robotics Team, alongside the unmistakable NASA insignia and the Vertex Automotive logo. Inside the shop, the normal sounds of wrenches and pneumatic tools had been replaced by the excited voices of teenagers making final adjustments to their competition entry. The Indianapolis Regional Efficiency Challenge was less than 24 hours away, and nervous energy filled the air as the team prepared for their departure early the next morning. Jackson Miller moved among the students, his calm presence a counterpoint to their jittery enthusiasm. Over the past 6 weeks, the garage bay he had cleared for the robotics team had evolved into a remarkable hybrid of auto shop and engineering laboratory. Professional diagnostic equipment shared space with student-built testing apparatus. Technical manuals stood alongside textbooks, And most tellingly, the students moved between theory and application with growing confidence, emboldened by Jackson's guiding principle: understanding why is just as important as knowing how. The battery management system is showing a 5% improvement since our last test run, reported Alicia, the serious-minded student who had first approached Jackson about aerodynamics. She had emerged as the team's chief systems engineer, coordinating the various technical components with impressive precision. If we maintain that efficiency through the entire course tomorrow, we should be well positioned for the endurance segment. Jackson nodded, reviewing the data on her tablet. Good work. But remember what we discussed about ambient temperature. Variations. Indianapolis might be cooler than our test conditions here. Already factored in, Mr. Miller, she replied with justified pride. We've run simulations across the predicted temperature range and adjusted the controller parameters. Accordingly, she hesitated, then added with a hint of mischief, using the same variable coefficient approach you developed for the Mars rover's thermal management system, the one described in your 2007 paper for the International Astronautical Congress. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Been doing your homework, I see. Research, Alicia corrected with a grin. On our technical advisor. Did you know your papers have been cited over 2,000 times? Or that your combustion efficiency breakthrough is referenced in every major aerospace engineering textbook published since 2010? I did not know that, Jackson admitted, feeling a complex mix of pride and humility, though I'm not sure how relevant my aerospace work is to your electric vehicle project. Principles transfer across domains, Alicia replied, echoing one of Jackson's own frequent sayings. That's what you've been teaching us these past 6 weeks. Before Jackson could respond, Sean Harper called from across the garage. Final. Weight check, everyone. We need to be under the limit with driver. The team gathered around their vehicle as Marco, the slimmest team member and designated driver, carefully positioned himself in the cockpit, while 2 others checked the digital scale beneath the wheels. When the numbers stabilized, a cheer erupted. They were a full kilogram under the weight limit. Great work, team, Jackson said, pride evident in his voice. I think we're as ready as we can be. Remember, whatever happens tomorrow, what you've accomplished already is remarkable. 6 weeks ago, your power management system couldn't run for 10 minutes without overheating. Now you're ready to compete against teams from across the country. Thanks to you, Mr. Miller, Sean said, the sentiment immediately echoed by his teammates. We wouldn't have had a chance without your help. Jackson shook his head. I provided guidance, but you did the work. You adapted, innovated, and solved problems I didn't even anticipate. That's real engineering. As the students began the process of securing the vehicle for transport, Miguel approached Jackson, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He had been working on regular customer repairs in the adjacent bay, keeping the business running while Jackson divided his attention between the shop and the robotics team. Bus is all set for tomorrow, Miguel reported. Oil changed, tires checked, full tank of gas. Principal Woodward asked me to tell you the school board approved additional funding for overnight accommodations if the team advances to the second day of competition. Let's hope they'll need it, Jackson replied. These kids deserve a shot at the finals. Miguel glanced around the transformed garage, a thoughtful expression on his face. Things sure have changed around here since that Vertex lady showed. Up 6 weeks ago, haven't they, boss? Jackson followed his gaze, taking in the scene. Indeed, Crossroads Auto Repair had undergone a remarkable evolution. While 2 of the 3 service bays remained dedicated to their regular automotive business, which continued to thrive, the 3rd had become something entirely new, a space where theoretical knowledge and practical application converged, where students and community members alike could learn and create. The change extended beyond the physical space. Word had spread throughout Millfield and beyond about the mechanic with NASA credentials who was mentoring the high school robotics team. New customers came to the shop, often with questions that went beyond routine maintenance. Local science teachers brought their classes for demonstrations. And perhaps most significantly, Jackson himself had changed, integrating aspects of his identity that had remained separated for too long. "Change can be good," Jackson said finally, answering Miguel's question. "Especially when it means growth rather than replacement." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Elena Rodriguez, who had returned to Millfield for the competition trip. Her frequent video conferences with the team over the past 6 weeks had made her a familiar figure to the students who greeted her with enthusiastic updates on their final preparations. "How are our future engineers doing?" she asked Jackson after the initial flurry of greetings. "Ready as they'll ever be," he replied. "Their design is solid, their preparation thorough. Now it's just a matter of execution, and perhaps a bit of luck." Eleanor nodded, studying him with knowing eyes. "And what about you, Jack? Are you ready for tomorrow?" The question carried multiple layers of meaning. Tomorrow wasn't just the robotics competition. It was also the day scheduled for the official announcement of the Firefly Engine Technology Partnership between Vertex, NASA, and Jackson himself. The agreement had been finalized weeks ago, the patents properly valued and credited, the implementation plans carefully structured to ensure broad accessibility across market segments. But the public unveiling, timed to coincide with the competition, would thrust Jackson into a spotlight he had avoided for 15 years. "As ready as I'll ever be," he echoed his own words with a slight smile. "Though I'm more concerned about the kids than the press conference." "They'll do fine," Elena assured him. "You've prepared them well." She paused, then added more quietly, "You know, the NASA Education Outreach Director will be at the competition tomorrow. He's very interested in what you've been doing here, this integrating practical mechanics with theoretical engineering education." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You didn't mention that before." "Didn't want to add pressure," Elena admitted. "But Jack, what you've created here, this bridge between academic theory and hands-on application, it's exactly what STEM education needs more of. The director wants to discuss potential broader implementations of your approach." Before Jackson could respond, Mayor Jenkins arrived, accompanied by several town council members and, surprisingly, Amanda Wells from Vertex. The mayor's presence at robotics team meetings had become a regular occurrence over the past weeks, his enthusiasm for the project growing with each demonstration of progress. Amanda's appearance, however, was unexpected. "Jack!" the mayor called, his political instincts for the dramatic entrance undiminished. "The final preparations are looking good, I see. Millfield's finest young minds ready to show the big city what small-town innovation looks like." The students, accustomed to the mayor's grandiloquence, continued their work with fond eye rolls. Jackson greeted the group, shaking hands with the council members before turning to Amanda with questioning eyes. "Ms. Wells, I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow's announcement." Amanda smiled, her demeanor markedly different from their first meeting 6 weeks prior. Gone was the corporate condescension, replaced by genuine professional respect. "I came early to see the team's final preparations," she explained. "Vertex is proud to be sponsoring their entry, and I wanted to wish them luck in person." She glanced around the garage with evident approval. "What you've accomplished here in just 6 weeks is remarkable, Dr. Miller. Not just the vehicle, impressive as it is, but this entire educational environment." Mayor Jenkins seized the opening with practiced political timing. "Speaking of educational environments, Amanda and I have been discussing the Wilson property plans. The initial architectural renderings are ready for your review, Jack, whenever you're ready to take that next step." The Wilson property, The abandoned manufacturing site adjacent to the high school had been the subject of increasingly serious discussions over the past weeks. What had begun as the mayor's impulsive suggestion had evolved into a structured proposal for the Millfield Applied Science and Engineering Center, with Jackson as its founding director, supported by partnerships with both NASA's Educational Outreach Program and Vertex's Community Investment Initiative. The concept drawings, developed based on Jackson's initial sketches, envisioned a facility where theoretical instruction and practical application would coexist in integrated spaces. Classrooms opening directly into workshops, lecture areas, with both traditional seating and hands-on stations, laboratories equipped for both conceptual learning and functional prototyping. After the competition, Jackson replied, a response that had become his standard whenever pressed for commitment on the center. One challenge at a time. The mayor nodded, accustomed to Jackson's measured approach. Of course. Of course. Tomorrow is the Students' Day, speaking of which, I've arranged for the town's digital billboard to display messages of support, and the elementary school children have made banners to line Main Street when the team returns, win or lose. Udage, as the mayor continued detailing the town's plans for celebrating the robotics team, Jackson felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Luke Harper, Sean's younger brother, who had begun apprenticing at the shop 3 afternoons a week, learning basics automotive maintenance while his siblings worked with the robotics team. "Mr. Miller," the boy said quietly, "there's a man outside asking to see you. He says he's from Archer Systems." Jackson frowned. Archer Systems was one of Vertex's main competitors, a company known for aggressive business tactics and technological acquisition rather than innovation. "Did he say what he wants?" Luke shook his head. "Just that he needs to speak with you urgently before tomorrow's announcement." Excusing himself from the mayor's ongoing monologue, Jackson made his way to the shop's entrance. Standing beside a luxury sedan in the parking lot was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, his expensive suit incongruous against the backdrop of the modest auto repair shop. "Dr. Miller," the man extended his hand as Jackson approached. "Harrison Teller, Executive Vice President of Development at Archer Systems. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me." Jackson shook the offered hand briefly, but remained guarded. "What can I do for you, Mr. Teller? I'm in the middle of final preparations with my students for tomorrow's competition." Teller's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, the high school robotics team. Quite a charming side project, but I'm here to discuss matters of greater significance, specifically your Firefly engine technology and your arrangement with Vertex Automotive." "Announcements can be postponed," Teller countered smoothly. "Contracts can be amended or dissolved. Dr. Miller, Archer Systems is prepared to offer you twice what Vertex has agreed to pay for exclusive rights to your technology." Jackson's expression remained impassive. "The terms of my agreement with Vertex were never primarily about money, Mr. Teller. They involved specific commitments regarding implementation scope, accessibility across market segments, and support for educational initiatives here in Millfield. All of which Archer can match or exceed," Teller responded without hesitation. "Plus considerably greater financial compensation for yourself personally." He named a figure that would have been life-changing for most people in Jackson's position. For a moment, Jackson was silent, studying the man before him. 15 years ago, as a rising star at NASA with multiple patents already to his name, such offers had been commonplace. Companies had regularly approached him with lucrative proposals for exclusive rights to his innovations. He had learned to evaluate them not just for their financial terms, but for their alignment with his broader goals, the real-world impact of his work. "Mr. Teller," he said finally, "I appreciate your interest in my technology, but I've made commitments to Vertex, to NASA, to this community, and especially to those students in there preparing for tomorrow's competition. Those commitments are not for sale at any price." Teller's pleasant facade faltered slightly. "Dr. Miller, perhaps I haven't made myself clear. Archer Systems isn't merely offering you financial compensation. We're offering you a return to prominence in the engineering world, a state-of-the-art research facility, a team of top engineers at your disposal, the resources to bring not just the Firefly, but all your future innovations to fruition on a global scale." The offer was expertly crafted to target what Teller presumed were Jackson's deepest desires: recognition, resources, a return to the prestigious position he had once occupied. What the executive failed to understand was how profoundly Jackson's priorities had evolved over the past 15 years, and especially over the past 6 weeks. "Mr. Teller," Jackson replied, his voice quiet but firm, "look around you. This modest repair shop has everything I need: honest work that helps my neighbors, the freedom to pursue innovations without corporate constraints, and now the opportunity to mentor the next generation of engineers. What exactly are you offering that would improve upon that?" Before Teller could respond, the shop door opened behind them. Jackson turned to see Sean Harper standing there, a concerned expression on his face. "Everything okay, Mr. Miller?" "The team's ready for the final systems check before we secure the vehicle for the night." "Everything's fine, Sean," Jackson assured him. "Mr. Teller was just leaving." The executive's gaze shifted between Jackson and the teenager, a new calculation evident in his eyes. "Perhaps I've misunderstood your situation, Dr. Miller. I assumed you were using this setting as a temporary arrangement while developing your technology. If you're genuinely content with this limited scope for your talents, then I won't waste more of your time." The condescension in Teller's tone, the implication that Jackson's current life represented a waste of his potential, rather than a conscious choice, struck a familiar chord. It echoed Amanda Wells's initial dismissive attitude 6 weeks ago, the assumption that a man in mechanics coveralls couldn't possibly be making his highest contribution to the world. "Mr. Teller," Jackson said, a new intensity in his voice, "I understand that from your perspective, success has a very specific appearance: corporate titles, financial compensation, global influence. I respected those measures of achievement once myself, but over the past 15 years, I've come to value different metrics: the integrity of my work, the balance of theory and application, the direct impact I can have on individual lives." He gestured toward Sean, who was watching the exchange with undisguised curiosity. "That young man and his teammates represent the future of engineering, not just because of their technical aptitude, but because they're learning to solve problems with both theoretical understanding and practical skill. They're discovering that innovation isn't limited to corporate R&D departments or university laboratories, that it can happen in garages and workshops and community spaces." Jackson straightened slightly, his posture reflecting a quiet confidence that needed no external validation. "So thank you for your offer, but my decision stands. The Firefly technology will proceed as planned with Vertex and NASA, ensuring the broadest possible implementation and accessibility. And I'll continue my work here in Millfield, bridging worlds that are too often kept separate." Teller's expression hardened, the pleasant veneer dropping away entirely. "You're making a serious mistake, Dr. Miller. Archer Systems doesn't take rejection lightly. We have ways of acquiring technology we believe in, with or without the inventor's cooperation." The thinly veiled threat might once have intimidated Jackson, but 15 years of independence had strengthened his resolve in ways the corporate executive couldn't comprehend. "That sounds remarkably like the approach that led Vertex to my doctor 6 weeks ago," Jackson observed calmly. "It didn't work for them then, and it won't work for you now. My patents are secure, my prototypes well documented, and as of tomorrow, my partnerships with Vertex and NASA will be public record. He gestured toward the shop, where Elena, Amanda, and Mayor Jenkins were now visible through the windows, watching the parking lot confrontation with evident concern. Not to mention my rather impressive network of supporters. So unless there's something else, Mr. Teller, I need to get back to my students. The executive's jaw tightened as he assessed the situation and found no leverage. With a curt nod, he returned to his luxury sedan and departed, the aggressive acceleration of his vehicle expressing the frustration he could no longer voice directly. As Jackson turned back toward the shop, he found Sean staring at him with new appreciation. That was Archer Systems, the company that tried to reverse engineer the MIT team's solar car design last year? Jackson raised an eyebrow. You follow corporate engineering news? Sean nodded. Our team researches all the major players in sustainable transport. Archer has a reputation for acquiring innovations rather than developing them. He hesitated, then added with teenage directness, Did he really offer you a lot of money to ditch Vertex? He did, Jackson confirmed simply, but some things aren't for sale. The teenager seemed to absorb this principle, filing it away, alongside the technical knowledge he'd been accumulating over the past 6 weeks, like integrity and commitments. Exactly, Jackson agreed, placing a hand on Sean's shoulder as they walked back toward the shop entrance. Success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about how you achieve it and who benefits from your achievements. Inside the garage, the team had completed their final preparations. The electric vehicle was secured to its trailer, ready for tomorrow's journey. Tools had been cleaned and organized. The nervous energy of earlier had transformed into determined anticipation. All systems a go, Mr. Miller, Alicia reported, her tablet displaying the final checklist with all items marked complete. We're ready for Indianapolis. As Jackson looked around at the assembled team, these bright young minds he had helped guide from frustrated uncertainty to confident preparation, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment that no corporate offer could match. In their growth over the past 6 weeks, he saw the integration of his own life's work, the theoretical brilliance of the NASA engineer and the practical wisdom of the small-town mechanic, combined to create something greater than either could achieve alone. Yes, he agreed, his voice reflecting both pride in their accomplishment and anticipation of the challenges ahead. We're ready. The words encompassed far more than the robotics competition. They acknowledged his readiness to step back into the public eye with tomorrow's announcement, his growing commitment to the proposed education center, and most importantly, his acceptance of his full identity, not as separate compartments, but as complementary aspects of a unified purpose. They had called him just a mechanic until they saw the patch on his jacket. But the true revelation hadn't been the NASA credentials or the engineering brilliance they represented. It had been the discovery that meaningful impact comes not from titles or accolades, but from the integrity of one's work and the lives transformed through that work, whether through revolutionary engine designs or through mentoring the next generation of innovators in a small-town garage, where theory and practice merged into something truly extraordinary. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.